Welcome to Part 2 of the Information Behavior of Engineers presentation. As the picture of my dog and the bookcase suggest on this slide, this is the literature review. There are three major frameworks that we chose to relate to the information behavior of engineers. These are Ziff's Principle of Least Effort, Wilson's 1996 Information Behavior Model, and Leckie's Information Seeking of Professionals Model. Ziff's principle of least effort was cited in most, if not all, of the sources we consulted, and Leckie's ISP model was also frequently cited in the literature on engineers. Case explains Ziff's principle of least effort as the idea that each individual will adopt a course of action that will involve the expenditure of the probable least effort of his work. In other words, people will generally try to use the least amount of effort in order to solve their information need. They will try to find the quickest and most efficient route to the answer. We did note in the literature that this is not always the main reason engineers will choose an information source. Claire Anderson and her colleagues found in their article an investigation of factors affecting how engineers and scientists seek information, that for the big picture, or, quote, the macro level, the principle of least effort is the main determinant for an information source. However, in their study of 872 U.S. aerospace scientists and engineers, they found that when it comes to print materials, it may not be the main determinant. Instead, the source's pertinence to their test seems to be the main determinant. Also, Ellis and Hogan in their article from 1997, Modeling the Information-Seeking Patterns of Engineers and Research Scientists in an Industrial Environment, found that engineers find it difficult to balance finding the best information with lack of time. The conflict between lack of time and the risk of failing to obtain important information is frequently apparent. This is Wilson's 1996 Model of Information Behavior. Wilson starts this model with considering the person in context. People have previous experiences that will affect their search behavior. Their roles and tasks and reasons behind the information need will also affect their behavior. This model also includes intervening variables that may help or hinder an information search. As the model shows, these variables could be psychological, demographic, role-related, or environmental. The characteristics of the information source could also help or hinder the search. Wilson's 1996 model adds in the idea that there are a variety of information-seeking behaviors. Active searching is not the only behavior. There is also passive searching, as well as ongoing searches. Another behavior this model addresses is the concept of reducing the risk of failure. An information retrieval system should be designed to reduce the risk of failure on the part of the user, which then increases self-efficacy or the user's confidence of their ability to use the IR system. This model works with and encompasses other information behavior models. This is Gloria Leckie and her colleagues' Information Seeking and Professionals model. The information-seeking behavior of engineers is the result of a complex interplay of variable from job function, work environment, qualifications, discipline, and career stage to accessibility of information, its ease of use, and technical quality. As Leckie's model illustrates, professionals, and in this case engineers, have a variety of roles or job functions which determine the tasks they need to accomplish, which then determine the characteristics of their information needs, such as accessibility information, its ease of use, and its quality. Engineers are very task-oriented, as Leckie mentions. Their work constantly requires them to set and achieve new goals in order to make their products better and faster. Medeli Dupreez also explains in her article that the level of the task's complexity, time constraints, degree of importance, and whether it was a planned or unplanned event all factor into the information-seeking process. One important item that should be drawn from the Leckie quote is the concept of accessibility. In the information-seeking of engineers literature, accessibility was the most important source characteristics, to refer back to Wilson, that affected engineers' choice whether to use that source or not. Fidel and Green explain in their work that accessibility is the major factor in source selection. A reason for this may be seen in Leckie's explanation of the environment that engineers work in. The work can be contractual or for in-house use. is always constrained by time, and seems most often conducted in an atmosphere of secrecy and confidentiality. Finding the information quickly is top priority for engineers. So what is accessibility? Take a second to think for yourself what accessibility might be. What of these characteristics listed above best describes accessibility? Fidel and Green sought to hash out what accessibility means in their article, The Many Faces of Accessibility, Engineers' Perception of Information Sources. The main characteristic of accessibility is that it minimizes effort. In their study of 32 engineers at a large manufacturing company, Fidel and Green found that the engineers considered familiarity to be an important factor in choice because it saves effort if they are already comfortable using the source. They also identified that these sources need to be available at a particular time. They made a distinction between accessibility and availability. Just because an item is accessible doesn't mean it is available at the particular time that one needs it. Finally, the cost of the item is important. Engineers have budgets, so the cost of an item may cause it to be inaccessible to them. Now that we understand accessibility, it is important to look at the types of information sources that engineers use. These are ranked in order of importance according to Anderson. First is the engineer's personal knowledge. Hartzum and Pedersen found that engineers who have worked in a particular specialty for a prolonged period of time tend to rarely seek out other sources because they are experts in their field. Instead, they use research in order to keep up with new ideas. Second, engineers highly value interpersonal sources. This is due to the fact that engineers work in teams. Quatsitsu explains that engineers work in dynamic business groups. They work closely with each other. We'll explain this in a little more detail in the next slide. Finally, seeking information from the above sources, engineers use formal sources such as written documents, libraries, and librarians. Pinelli found that aerospace engineers tend to turn to librarians and library services for assistance only after they have consulted their personal store of information, talked to coworkers and colleagues, consulted a key person, and used a library in a personal search mode. Now, after these top three, there are two other information sources that we considered. Non-textual sources, for instance, are physical objects engineers might purchase or obtain in order to tear them apart and study how they're made. And we chose to separate out internet sources because this is what the new research on engineers is focusing on. We'll explain more about internet sources shortly. Here's my husband with our dog Pearl, having a bit of a conference on the back lanai. Unfortunately, she seems rather unimpressed by whatever it is he's saying. Why are interpersonal sources so important to engineers? Well, first, they are accessible. And as we discussed earlier, accessibility is one of the main determinants in choosing an information source. Also, engineers tend to work in groups, and this group environment leads to collaboration. Both Pinelli and Fidel and Green describe collaboration as a way of life for engineers. Finally, Quatsitsu mentioned another reason engineers prefer interpersonal sources, and that is because they provide the context that a written document cannot. He explains that a written source can give engineers, quote, concrete product information, but the context behind the information comes from people. Engineers and the Internet. The Internet has been very helpful to engineers in a number of ways. First, it allows them to contact and interact with other people, as well as other engineers, whether they be in their office, or across the country, or across the world. So it encourages interpersonal sources. They can also find documents via the Internet, and they can purchase non-textual objects. In many cases, there is free access to the information, which is important in terms of the cost of the item. And there is a wide variety of information available. As Quatsitsu explains, almost equal in popularity is the Internet or the World Wide Web, whose free access and extensive subject coverage makes it one of the first sources of information that many engineers probe before seeking professional help from the corporate librarian. Here's Pearl again, surfing the Internet. Despite all that the Internet has to offer, Brink addresses a number of problems that engineers have with using the internet in his article, Engineers and the Web. The first problem that is not surprising is information overload. There is just too much information out there, both relevant and irrelevant. Another problem engineers face when searching on the web is a language gap. In keyword searching, information sources often use different terms than the engineers might. Engineers are searching with the technical terms, while information sources will often use the general terms for their keyword searches. Brink explains that most sources on the internet use the brand name, where the engineers are looking for the technical term. Also, there is a problem with areas of expertise. Most company websites are developed and maintained by the marketing departments and are designed for customers. This becomes a problem for engineers because they are again searching for technical information on the products that the websites don't list. And also, sometimes the information simply does not exist yet. It is too new. I wanted to end this presentation by discussing the new trends in research. Fidel and Green suggested creating people directories so the engineers would have a reference to use when looking for an engineer with a certain specialty, or for an engineer who has experience working on a given project. They explained that this would help engineers develop a familiarity with other engineers. Hertzum and Pajitsin also suggested such a service. Britt Mueller and her colleagues at Qualcomm Inc. have identified two additional ideas for informational professionals to assist engineers. First, training engineers to use the formal information sources. They noticed with the engineers at Qualcomm that even if the engineers knew about the information sources, they only knew how to use it at a basic level. Since engineers prefer to look for themselves before asking a librarian, Mueller and her colleagues felt that by training engineers to use the more advanced search features, they would be more likely to use a source because they'd be familiar with that source, and this would in turn create less effort for the engineers. Mueller and her colleagues also believe that librarians, specifically corporate librarians, need to be proactive about marketing themselves to the engineers at their organizations. They suggested doing this by developing relationships with the engineers, going out and meeting them so that they become familiar to the engineers. And a great way to do this refers back to their first suggestion, which is to train the engineers. And finally, to end on a lighter note, make the information sources fun. Brink was suggested by some of the engineers in his study that the information sources need to be fun. And one respondent gave an example of what he meant by fun. He thought Google was fun because during a search for information, he found all kinds of interesting things he was not looking for. This is another area that information professionals need to think is how can they make the information retrieval systems fun to the engineers. And finally, here is a last fun photo of Pearl in her box. Please continue on to the fieldwork section by clicking on the link provided.